All right.
It's Friday. It's fun.
It's Friday. Hey there, welcome to Architects 360, and I am Michael Giannotti along with
Rich Ross.
and we're here in the Philadelphia MTC, and today I understand we're talking Robbie the Robot.
Robbie the Robots. Yeah, the new version of Robbie the Robot.
Which is?
Which is bots.
Bots.
There are a lot of different
What's a
companies
bot?
out there. So bots are basically a way for people to interact with services. So think of, you have a Skype conversation, let's say.
Okay.
You're talking to someone, you're talking to a friend, you're talking to
Yeah.
a colleague. What if that wasn't a colleague on the other end? What if it was some kind of a service? And that
So like
service-
if I'm at my company and I needed help around something and I could actually go like maybe in Skype and talk to and have interaction like I'm having with a human being,
Sure.
but it using a bot.
It is. And to you, it's just a conversation.
Very cool.
So you could certainly go out to the web and you could search for that same kind of information.
All right.
So let's say we have a couple that we've already built, for example.
Yep.
Like there's the Bing service has put a number of them out. There's a music
Oh,
bot
nice.
that you can add in. And you could certainly search for music on the web, but this gives you a way of doing it through Skype, but that could also be included
But so
in
you can
other-
get right to the information you need and not be just this blind
Yes.
search. So that's cool. So today you're going to actually be showing or talking to us and kind of diagramming a little bit around what the bots framework.
Right. So we at Microsoft have something called Bot Framework.
Yep.
And it's a way of, like any other framework, it's a way of taking away some of those things that the code that developers don't have to write for themselves and make those connections for themselves. We kind of give you the hooks to go ahead and go in there and do that.
Yeah.
So that bot framework kind of comes in 3 parts, and this is something we announced back at Build back in March.
All right.
And there's been some updates to it recently, so it's probably good. Came up with some conversations we had at MGX, so it would be good to bring it out here.
Very cool. So
3 parts to the framework.
3.
Okay.
And you're going to
We're going to diagram a little bit.
diagram a bit here. So what's number 1?
Number 1 is the framework itself. So the
right.
thing that you would do to write your code against.
All right.
And that's basically just a website that has some understanding of what kind of question am I being asked and what I'm going to make a response to. So we'll talk
Okay.
about that in a little more detail later.
All right.
So this framework, which is 1.
Framework. Gotcha.
Part 2 is something called the connector. So
Maybe write a little bigger as you're writing. That one's okay. We know what it is. It's a framework. Next is a connector.
right. So while you make these bots with the code and the understanding, it has to connect to some kind of a service.
Right.
So this
Yep.
lets you connect to things like Skype, Slack.
And so these are ones that have published APIs and things out there, and our connectors are going to take the framework and hook it up using those APIs
Exactly.
without you having to write it custom.
Exactly, right. You write it once and you say, well, I want to connect it to all these various services.
Like that. Even a dummy like I can do that.
So the next part makes it even easier. So
No.
Yeah, so the third part is a directory. So once you've created your bot and
Right.
you connected it, you need to be able to find out how to include it inside of whatever service you're using, whether it's Skype or Slack. or
Gotcha.
Teams. So there's a directory out there that you can go and search for these bots and see if they have a connection into the application you're looking for.
Nice.
So that Bing one that we talked about at the
Yeah.
beginning, you can go out there and search a directory, and there's a bunch of Bing services, and you can say, well, I want to add it to Skype, and then it shows up in your Skype.
And you
preview.
actually had that like in a Skype preview thing running the other day. You showed me that.
Yes,
Yeah,
we're
very
putting
cool.
it in our innovation arena here because
Yep.
it's something that we really should be talking about the customers as they come through.
Hey,
So
how to use their bots.
exactly, or build them for
Build them.
themselves.
Build the bots. Yes.
So with those framework pieces, you're able to go ahead and get started on your own. So what we'll do is just a quick diagram to kind of show how that all
Okay.
lays out, because
Beautiful.
when you see it in the demo, and especially with some of the more complicated ones we're doing now around questions that are being asked and how you pull that back, people come with this as well, how does that work?
How does it work? All right. So
So-
why don't you show us how it works? Make sure we can see it big enough for our audience here. So we are drawing. This represents the client.
So we have some kind of a client. This could be a web app.
Okay.
It could be some custom application you're building. It could be the Skype or the Slack or those kind of applications we're
My
talking
phone.
about. Could be anywhere, right? I haven't tried it on a phone yet, but that would be interesting.
Yeah. All
So
right.
essentially, some place where you would have that connection being made, and then you
Okay.
would have some way of capturing a string of
Sure.
information, some question you want to ask. So let's say we have a bot that searches for the MTC.
Right.
Okay, and it says, okay, tell me the rooms that are in the MTC. So you
Mhm.
might have a search string in there that says search for Malvern.
Okay.
That's what we're looking for.
Nice.
Okay. So Malvern is the room that we're in here, so that kind of helps with the example here. So in this is what's going to represent our bot. Okay.
This big square.
This big square. So essentially, this is a web application that gets built, because what we're doing is we're basically making REST calls out to
Gotcha.
here.
Nice.
The bot that is out here, there are a number of there are two possible ways that you can write it. It's essentially a web page, but we give you an SDK for C#.
Yep.
So classic way of writing web apps, and then also Node.js. So if you're more comfortable on the JavaScript side, and you're using Node and those.
So we're
kind
going
of
to
tools,
handle it either way.
Yes. So
Nice.
you got some
Okay.
options. And
Cool.
then initially, while you're developing this might be residing locally on your local machine,
Mhm.
but you certainly could host this application up in Azure and make an Azure website.
Which would be beautiful.
Yes.
That's a beautiful thing.
And it doesn't matter whether you do that in C# or Node.
So you can
Still
do it in
make
either.
And you can still make an Azure web app,
Sweet.
which is pretty awesome. So you're going to go ahead and inside of here, so from your client, you're going to send that string of text we talked about, search
Right,
for malware,
right.
and your bot's going to basically do some processing around that. So
Okay.
we're just right now going to put a little black box in here for process.
All right.
So you have to write some code that understands that string and says,
Mhm.
well, that string contains something like search.
Right.
So I know I've got to do these kind of things.
Do the following calls, right?
And
Yep.
I may come out to here, and I may come out to some other kind of service that we have internally. Maybe it's another web API
Mm-hmm.
that understands about the rooms that we have here in the MTC. And I can ask it that question, and I can pass it the string malware, and it can come back with that information, and then it'll pass that along back to the client.
Back to the client. Gotcha.
Okay?
Yep.
So that's all pretty cool, and that's pretty straightforward, right?
Mhm.
But this logic that you kind of built in here for yourself around, hey, I want to process this string. I've got
Yeah.
to kind of understand it. I got to break the string down. Does search contain? It's
Right,
a little more
right.
complicated bit of code to write. There are some other services that you can include inside of your bot to kind of help that part of it. So if we take the process piece out of it here and not talk directly to the API, I'm going to slide down a
Okay.
little bit this
So
way.
you're going to call now, instead of just writing it all here, you're actually going to call some functions and things?
There's
from
a
elsewhere.
service that we have called Lewis. It's part of the Cortana intelligence.
This is not Lewis, your buddy that you
No.
hang out with on Saturdays. This is Lewis, the service.
Yes.
Although I know a gentleman named Lewis in St. Augustine, Florida.
Awesome.
He might want to write a bot.
You might.
He might.
This will be good. So what Lewis will provide you is you can create things called entities.
Yep.
So an entity would be, intents. You would create intents. So in this case, we're doing
Ah,
a search.
Gotcha.
We might want to have another intent be schedule. We might have another intent that says, find.
It's different functions that you want it to
Exactly.
net.
And then Lewis understands that by entering and creating those intents inside of there,
Mhm.
it understands that when it gets that string and it contains search,
Yep.
you're intending to find something.
Right, right.
So it understands and it'll break that string down and
Mhm.
say you're searching for most likely a room.
Yep.
Those rooms are what they call entities. So
Yep.
this is a real high level of what Lewis does. There's a whole big discussion we can get around and maybe show at some point what Lewis does.
You can show Lewis.
Yes. So what you're doing though is making that string that the bot understands, making it, offloading that processing over here to this better engine for
Right.
handling that. And then all it does is it comes back with essentially a JSON string that says, this is what the person is intending to do. They're
Okay.
intending to search for something.
Gotcha.
And what they're searching for is a room, and here's the room. So
Gotcha.
it gives you that information back. It
All right.
parses that string, and that makes this whole processing part easier. You don't have to build.
You
up
don't have
your
to
whole-
write all this by
Exactly.
nice.
All this, switch statements.
Because if I wrote it, we know it would happen. Probably nothing after the problem. Error.
Right.
All right.
And that's
Beautiful.
And that's one of the things that could fall down to it. So if
Yeah.
we get through all this
Yep.
and it doesn't, you can handle that very gracefully and say, I'm not really sure what you're talking about. Can you ask it again?
Gotcha.
So
Nice.
And that logic around we've kind of failed through, we don't really understand, is all part of the framework there.
Right.
So that at a high level is really, we can make some simple bot processing work here, but when things get
Yep.
really complicated, you might want to offshift some of that logic processing out to something that understands that a little better. And then once you get that information back about what I want to search and what I specifically want to search for, because that's
Right.
what Lewis broke it down to, you could then call your services and your APIs to send that information back.
And
to
send
the
it
client.
back to the client. Again, the client can be either a true client, it can even be a web app.
Could be a
And
web app,
you
yeah.
can run that up in Azure,
Mhm.
set that up, and you said you can do that both ways.
Yes,
Right?
absolutely.
Sweet.
And then the other thing is, this is one specific bot talking about the MTCs here.
Yeah.
You might have other bots that talk about things like the weather, or they talk about traffic conditions.
You can have them all roll up in this client, or would you want to
You might want to pull them together
Pull
via
them
something
together.
like a digital assistant,
Yep.
like Cortana, that
Yep.
can then talk to each one of those.
That understands them and then can bring it back intelligently.
Exactly.
Nice.
So that, really quick.
That's
it's-
it. That's a quick overview of bots. If people
Yeah.
want to get started with bots, so I know we have developers out there, we have clients and folks that are, we got people in startups and in the
Yeah.
education sector. We had, you and I had kids in this week.
We had lots of kids
right?
this week, yeah.
And some of them were interested in computer programming. So
Definitely.
if somebody wants to get started with the bot framework, what should they do?
So the best way to go to get started with the bot framework is to go to botframework.com. We have a whole site,
Botframework.com.
Yep.
One word, bot framework.
all one word. You can go out there, it has links to all the SDK, it has links to some of the
Nice.
basic tutorials that step you from a very simple,
Oh, so they can get their
type-
feet wet,
Oh,
get
yeah.
their hands dirty without having to just stumble through from scratch.
Exactly.
Nice.
So you can get started with, just a very, like a quick parrot type app. You
Yep.
say a word and it replies back to you, all the way up to, I want to make a, we have some form functionality built
Yeah.
over here, so you could create an order, like you want to
Yep.
order a sandwich or pizza or something, and it
Yep.
can step you through that. And then
Pizza?
taking you to pizza. It's early for pizza. All the way up to the more complicated pieces. And there are videos and things out there to get started.
Very nice. So, botframework.com.
Botframework.com.
Get started, get your hands dirty, your feet wet, kind of dissect it as you go. I know that's how I learn, is always
Yes.
examples. It's a lot easier for me than sitting there from scratch from a book or a website and just reading through. So that's a great way to get started.
Right.
And you said the SDK and everything's there.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
you can download them
Rock
all
and
there,
roll.
get them up and going. Just it's in preview still, so probably should mention that, as a lot of the things
Yeah,
are, right?
sure.
But what's great about it, as we've talked about previews before, if you go through and try it and you have suggestions, get your input into user
Right.
voice. We've already done 2 releases, one in April, one in July.
Nice.
And they have definitely included feedback from people who've been trying it and kicking the tires around and say, hey, we'd like to see it do this as well.
So user voice, botframework.com.
Yes,
And folks can get rocking and rolling.
absolutely.
With that, with bots, not Robbie the robot today. I'm still waiting for that. Maybe someday. But with that, this is Mike Gennati, Solutions Architect with
Rich Ross, Solutions Architects,
here at the.
Philadelphia MTC.
Have a great day. Take care, and as always, ciao.